But for me, the pain of it was so intense, I turned to addictive behaviors. The reality is we never really truly know what someone is going through unless you've lived their entire experience.
I was making moves and decisions based on external validation or external pressure.
I'm saying yes to stuff that it was actually hurting me.
I spent many years of my life choosing to not say no or not be open and honest about how I felt. Divorce is not something I would ever want for anyone. We have to be okay with endings when they're meant to end.
For me, and even my children, divorce was actually one of the best things that's ever happened to our family. And at the end of the day, everybody has to choose for themselves. There's no right or wrong. Certain things should come to an end, even though it might be painful.
Just because the relationship you're in, you may want out, doesn't mean the next relationship is going to be any
100%.
different. So,
authenticity is the cost of not being liked. The saying, the truth sets you free. The truth hurts. Well, welcome to the Burn Up Podcast. I'm super excited today for the gentleman that I have with me. He's a good friend, known each other a long time. Isaac Childs is with me, and I've known Isaac for several years, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. There's been a lot of parallels in our life. We both had businesses that ended up having to be closed, failed, whatever you want to call it. We both have gone through a bankruptcy. We both have gone through divorce, and we're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about the pain of going through that and the lessons we've learned, and things that have happened in the past don't define who we are. It's things that happened and everything we've learned from that. And I first heard your name years ago back in the days of the Corporate Alliance.
Yeah.
You owned a company called Rustico, doing leather goods, journals, and so forth. And everything was Rustico. I saw you everywhere before I even knew who you were.
Right. That's awesome.
But anyway, dude, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you again for being here. And
absolutely.
And and getting real and sharing our story. I think you recognize this or know this more now based off experiences. We all have shit. We all have challenges and trials, and to go through stuff that's so public, right? And just to strike, all these core childhood wounds and all these things. It's definitely a journey.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. It's a journey. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So,
well, gosh, let's dig into this. So, let's go. So let's talk about Rustico.
Okay.
What happened there? How long ago did you start Rustico?
Yeah. The brief story, not to bore everyone, 22-year business. I started it in college with a couple buddies. Literally September 6th, 2001. I got married August 16th, 2001. So two major milestones or shifts in my life happened in that year, and grew that business to 22 years, and then closed the doors in November of 2023 is the short synopsis there on that. And so what was that? We could dive into details there if you want.
Yeah.
So.
Similar things. So I was married in January of 2001, started my business shortly thereafter. I was 20 years,
and
it's, and again, we don't need to get into all necessarily the nitty gritty of the companies and all the different things, really what I want to talk about that I think even today with what we're building, each of us individually and other men out there, so much of our identity is tied to our company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, so when I was going through the pain of losing my investment firm, it wasn't just a paycheck, it wasn't just anyone else that was affected by it. That was all very, very painful. But at the core of it was it was who I was.
Yeah.
It was my identity. It was my business. It was my life.
Yeah.
And, and just, I've had these conversations in the past, and you felt some of the similar feelings.
Yeah, I think you said it best. When you first met me, it was Rustico, and even as I was closing the doors and started to let that be known to kind of the community, especially this networking community that we have here in Utah, which is awesome. I love it. Some of my good friends in that community were almost as devastated as I was with you're Mr. Rustico. It's kind of the way it was approached. And yeah, my identity was I was Mr. Rustico. And I think that was part of the reason why I held on to it for 5 years longer than I probably should have. Because my identity was I'm Mr. Rustico. This can't fail. Right. And this can't evolve really was the thing that I think I had lost track of failure is totally fine. Evolution is part of the process, and that has to happen. But I had tied my identity to this idea of what Rustico was, how that was tied to me, and how it needed to perform, and that created this ultimately disappointment, right? In some ways, not a disappointment, because I have so many awesome memories, which are now even stronger than when it really kind of came crashing down for a bit. That was really sad. There was a lot of grieving, but ultimately, this identity that I held on to in terms of how I was this business and what it meant to me, and is part of the reason why it ended up having to end the way it did.
As entrepreneurs, and I think any entrepreneur business owner knows this, like we live in a world of pivots, right? It's like we hit a roadblock, we hit something that, that says no. It's like, oh no, there's always a way. There's always a way, right? Multiple pivots do this, whether it's raising capital, hire this, all the different moving parts. And it's like, it's like, we're going to do this. We're always going to move forward. And that still today is one of my, superpowers, is it's like, hey, there's always a way. We can always find a way. And the painful thing for me is I'm fighting and I'm pushing through. There's always a way. There's always a way. And then the acceptance of like, no, there is actually no way. Like, it's done. Mm-hmm. And the acceptance of that for me was so painful. Yeah. It was so painful. And mine was spread out over a long period of time. And if I'm being honest, it started, literally 2 or 3 years before it actually kind of all came, when it was all final. But for me, the pain of it was so intense. I turned to addictive behaviors, different substances. I was trying to do everything not to feel the pain of that. And, we started talking about this before, the season that I'm in today is learning to just really accept just what is. And I just was not ready to accept it.
Yeah.
And just fighting through it and fighting through it and fighting through it. And just the truth was, like, ultimately I ran out of money. I couldn't, for legal fees and doing all the things, like I couldn't continue to do that. And just such a painful process. And yet once you accept it, once it all kind of came out, as painful as it was, there was also some freedom that was associated with it.
Yeah.
Did you feel almost like this weight was taken off?
Yeah. No, a couple of things there. Like, I think, 2 or 3 years before really we closed the doors, if I'm looking back, right, and assessing like where I was, like, if I had been able to accept some of the changes that needed to happen at the business at that time, I still think we would have closed the doors, but I think my process would have shifted, right? I totally kept doubling down, if you will. I kept finding the way until suddenly it was like, door slammed. There is no way. And I look at it as kind of like me just holding too tightly to the wheel, right? Like, I want to go this way, and I'm going to wait till someone literally hits me to make that change happen. And that's what kind of had to happen for me.
But were there many times in years before where, like, your hands on the wheel, if you will, like your example, and things are hitting you, but like you stayed true to what you're doing and you actually moved through it? You were actually right, in fact, in staying the wheel versus whatever else was happening.
Yeah.
So I had plenty of evidence to support, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to move through this. We're going to move through this. And like, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, that's not the case. Like, there is no way through. It's done. It just...
the funny thing about that, and here's the thing that's interesting, is like, there's this kind of two sides to look at this. Like, one is like, go back and say, hey, if I had been able to detach unattach from the way that it was going and allow some of the shifts to happen when they happen, then I would have been able to get through it maybe, right? But then the other side of me is like, if I actually hadn't have held on, had those things occur, continue to fight through it, right? See what was happening to all of a sudden then have the ending it had. Now I'm able to go back and see what happened there, right? Feels like, okay, so it still happened the way it was supposed to happen, right? Like, I did what I was supposed to do, if you want to say that. Or like, I moved in the best interest of the business, of me, right? But at the same time, I could have moved in a different way. I can only see that though now.
With the benefit of hindsight, right? It's easy to play Monday morning quarterback.
Yes. And there's no way at that time I would say, I should have been able to see better. I should have been unattached. Well, it wasn't until the door slammed, and coming back to your other comment, like the relief when it did close down, right, was interesting, because a lot of people at that time were just hearing about it. The devastation for them was real. But I likened it a little bit to like, this is a 22-year-old child, and for the last 3 to 4 years it felt like it was on life support, right? And so when finally it was like the business was over, there was a lot more relief on my end of like, here I am propping up something that feels like it's me, it's this identity of me, but at the same time just wanting to like let that go, right? And then comes this relief and of course grief of my identity towards that, and then also now the opportunity for me to understand like that was never me to begin with. Right?
Yeah. Again, fascinating. You said something I think is really important that I think applies in all of life. That one of my biggest takeaways in what I went through and just what you're sharing is like, people hear your story, hear what happens, and I've heard hundreds of times, well, I wouldn't have done that. Well, I wouldn't have done that. And there's part of me that it's like, well, I can't believe I did that either. But then the reality is like, we never really truly know what someone is going through unless you've lived their entire experiences. Like that, some of those decisions you made in those last few years, the decisions that I made were decisions from a previous decision, and it's like, before all of a sudden it's like, you look back, like, I can't believe I did that, or I did this. But the reality is like, given all the different pieces that led up to that, which is what led to that, and I don't know about you. One of the things for me, having gone through all of this, before, even today, if I hear something about somebody or something, everybody's like, can you believe this? Or I can't believe this happened. And my default now is like, I wonder what else is, I wonder what else is going on. And if it's about a person in this person's life, or what led them to do that. I'm in a much more curious, more empathetic standpoint because of what I went through, and trying to understand, because everybody's judging everybody, and it's like, well, I would have done this, and this. Like, well, yeah, I hear you. And like, and then sometimes to be able to explain it or articulate it, that people just don't get it. And what I've learned is like, ultimately it's like, none of us really know unless we've actually experienced, and not only something specific to this, like you and I can connect in this because we both have lost a business, but I don't know intimately well all the decisions that you made or didn't make that led to that, or vice versa. I can share it. We can connect in it. But the reality is neither of us know. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know if we ever will know, right? From the outside looking in to someone else's journey, if you will, or path, like the decisions they make and the choices that come out and reflect back out towards the outer world. Like we only get to see that specific instance, right? But all of the myriad of experiences that occurred on the path as they walked to get to that juncture is totally theirs. And like you said, like, yeah, I am 100% more willing to observe when someone makes a decision that feels catastrophic, feels chaotic, that may feel out of the norm, and just observe like, okay, where are they coming from, rather than assuming that such and such happened or this occurred because of my own experience, right? I think that if you take a look at that, I'll come back to just me and like how I operated a lot of the way in the world, was this idea of like, I was making moves and decisions based on external validation, really, right? 100%. Or external pressures. And it wasn't necessarily other people pressuring me, but me choosing to let the need for the validation or for the process or for whatever standard was out there pressure me, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this multiple times, if you could peel all the layers back as to why I lost my company, I couldn't say no. And I was saying yes to so many things because my worth was tied to, I mean, I'm a recovering people pleaser, but it's like my worth was tied to, to saying yes to everything. And it's like, oh, I felt good because I'm helping this person or saying yes to all these things. Like if I said no, what are they going to think? Or if I, and sometimes I was conscious of it, but more often than not, like I'm saying yes to stuff that it's like, it was actually hurting me. Yeah. Or it might have even been out of alignment or out of my own personal integrity. But nevertheless, I was saying yes to stuff because I wanted to show up for this person. I wanted to let anybody down. And, and the irony in the whole thing is I ended up letting down a lot of people, in that whole process of not being just true to me, because so much of my worth was tied to how other people saw me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can relate to that quite a bit. I feel like that as Rustico came crashing down in some ways, and I won't say it crashed down. I mean, I like to look at it as like, as a 22-year sailboat that we pushed out and let it slowly sink in the bottom of Lake Powell, if you will.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, but beautiful. But at the same time, as that identity shifted and I started to actually see where my patterning in the decisions I'd made, it was causing me to not be truthful, not be honest in these long-term relationships. Other areas of my life also had some havoc, and I do feel like what you said is really important. I spent many years of my life choosing to not say no or not be open and honest about how I felt in hopes of not hurting others because of my need or my want to be liked, that it ended up actually just holding all that in reserve and then opening the floodgates later on and creating kind of a shift.
And you kind of had a double whammy because you were in the process of losing a business, and also your marriage came to an end right during that same season. You know, I went through a divorce several years before mine, and I wouldn't wish divorce on my worst enemy. I mean, it's a very painful process. I mean, it takes you places you never thought you would go, and you were going through that, and losing the business, and then ultimately, ended up getting divorced.
Yeah. I think the distraction of the business for me was a huge reason why I think I was ignoring some of the areas in my relationship that I was not being truthful in, like 100%. If for a lot of intents and purpose, our relationship was on the outside very good. And even for both of us, we were fairly compatible. Where I was totally ignoring was that inner person in me. And once again, wanting to salvage what I could of protect my kids, my spouse, my family from the hurt that could happen if I was just open, caused that relationship also to really catastrophically end. In some ways, I use that word, but I agree with you. Divorce is not something I would ever want for anyone. And absolutely would hope that, I guess I would counsel for sure, work through what you can. But on the flip side of that, I have a very strong, I guess I have a very strong feeling now that we have to be okay with endings when they're meant to end. And I feel like that in some ways, divorce is scary. It is very scary, and it should be contemplated and should be considered with a lot of thought and a lot of preparation, a lot of thinking. But we also need to give ourselves permission to really look at our relationships at times, if needed. At least when it comes to divorce. So on that note, that's one thing that I've noticed, especially this last year, is I've had countless people come talk to me about why did you end your relationship the way it did, and what was it that caused that to be that way, and that's usually what I find is two things. One, they're really just asking, they want outside permission to be it's okay if I choose to go in another route here. Which, once again, I do not, whatever, there's a lot of things about divorce that you just don't know until you are divorced that they're not exciting. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things in the world. But at the same time, I think being open to the idea and the option of hey, why is that here, right? This is kind of coming back to the decisions that we make that we see other people make that we don't understand all of the details to them. And so allowing for just giving that permission to yourself to be at least open to is this relationship for me is super important.
And also that it's actually okay.
Yeah.
It's again, accepting, again, both of us were, raised in the Mormon culture and the marriage, and you don't end, and eternal families. And there's all these, there's religious, societal, norms or expectations around all of this stuff. And again, none of us get married thinking, oh, we're planning on getting divorced. I actually, side note, I went to, except for one guy, I went to his wedding, and literally before he's getting married, he leaned over to me. He's like, I got a prenup. He's like, I only have to pay this much if this doesn't work. He literally said that on his wedding day. And I'm like, oh, this isn't going to end. And I think they lasted 6 months or a year. But besides that, nobody gets married thinking they're planning on getting divorced.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course it's identity, and it's I'm letting everybody down and doing all the things. And I can speak for me, and even my children, divorce was actually one of the best things that's ever happened to our family, which I know might sound crazy or people even to hear that. But the reality is my kids are better. I'm better. My co-parent, my ex-wife, we're much better friends and co-parents than we were lovers and being married. and it's okay. It didn't turn out the way neither of us wanted initially, but it's also not the end of the world. And I've gone on to experience things that I never would have experienced otherwise had I stayed, you know, in that relationship. And you know, and the big thing too, what is like for kids, like I'm going to hurt my kids or ruin my kids. And I had an experience, I'll never forget this. In fact, I shared this with someone the other day, that there was a moment where for the last year, I wasn't even really sleeping in our room. I was sleeping on the couch. And there was this night where I was asleep on the couch and my son was there with his friends. And he's like, "Hey Dad, can you go somewhere else to sleep?" Right. So I get up, blanket wrapped around me, and I kind of my own walk of shame. And I remember walking away and I'm like, what example am I showing my kids for like what a healthy relationship is? You know, it was just a bit, it's like this, to stay together for the kids, to me, is actually the wrong reason to stay together. You know, and I've said this, I've said it on social, I've had people come back at me, not this is the reason, or I've had, of course, and at the end of the day, everybody has to choose for themselves. There's no right or wrong. Like what's right for you might not be right for me, and that's okay. And who am I to say what's right for you? In fact, none of us know what's right for anyone else except ourselves.
Right.
And even though that might mean we make difficult decisions where things come to an end, and I believe, you know, that certain things should come to an end, even though it might be painful. And there's beauty that comes from the pain or the destruction or the failure or the heartbreak or whatever it happens to be. And while a door might close, you know, there's other doors that are open and constantly opening, you know, and that we wouldn't have an opportunity to lean into or even see had we not gone through that. And I think even relationally for me, I mean, I'm pretty passionate about this because I believe, you know, I mean, whatever the divorce rate is, you know, it's over 50%, almost 60%. And then you look at who stays married, and, you know, most of the people that I would argue, my belief is, from the couples that I know, a lot of them are just, they're roommates. They're just kind of going, they're comfortable.
Yeah. I think that stat actually says like out of the 48% that get divorced, out of the other 52%, right? Like 40% of those are unhappily married, right?
And so how many people are really, truly, actually, really thriving, right? It's rare. And again, to each their own. Every person has to make their decision.
Yeah. And there's another side of that argument, which is like, just because the relationship you're in, you may want out, doesn't mean the next relationship is going to be any different.
100%.
So being in a relationship unhappily doesn't necessarily mean that means you should get divorced either.
The grass to me is green where you water it.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the big things that I want to talk about too, we talked about it before we started recording, is really about how important it is that we show up, how important authenticity is, you know, and there's a lot of fear for that. I said earlier, I posted something on social media today. I was like, you know, authenticity is the cost of not being liked, you know, and many times I didn't share how I was truly feeling because I didn't want to, you know, hurt the person. You know, then there's abandonment things. There's all these different stories, but the truth was, by not speaking my truth, I was self-betraying, building up resentment or building up feelings. And I was just hurting myself, and frankly was hurting the relationship because I wasn't being honest.
Right. Yeah. And that's a lot of ways how I felt like that I was being in my relationship. And where that is like, you know, I actually struggled a little bit with this, and I feel like I'm a pretty authentic person. And have felt like that from my entire adult life. In fact, one of the main values at Rustico is like authenticity, right? Your most authentic self. And as I went through these shifts and changes, like to me, and realized like how much in my life I was not showing up authentically. I struggled with that a little bit, and I had a therapist, a good buddy of mine, that he helped me kind of see through that a little bit. He was like, "Isaac, I think the word you're looking for is you're genuine, right? Authentic, maybe not quite the way that the way that you are thinking of it, but genuine, yes. Like I absolutely genuinely wanted to not hurt those around me, like my ex, my kids, my family. Like I genuinely wanted to be liked by everyone. I genuinely wanted to support and do that, but at the cost of my own authenticity. And by authenticity, it's not necessarily like the things I like to do, like, but more importantly, the way that I was going to show up. So instead of me just showing up and saying, this is actually how I feel, I would sacrifice me saying that for the sake of someone else's emotions. And that's what I mean by true authenticity. Like in a lot of areas of my life, I still feel like I'm very authentic. Like I know what I like, right? And I know how I want to show up in these certain ways. But when it comes to my feelings, and that especially when it comes to relationships, I know I absolutely betrayed myself. And in the process of trying to prevent someone else from feeling hurt, selfishly, I was protecting myself from having to go through that uncomfortability of not being liked.
Which the irony in that is we don't want to hurt our person,
but we end up hurting our person.
But we ended up hurting our person.
Yeah.
Because we're not being true to ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and so both people end up getting hurt versus just speaking to it.
Which comes all the way back to the divorce thing, right? Like, no matter how much I once again, like, I think divorce is hard, and going through that is a massively hard process. But if you really can sit and ground in yourself and understand where you're coming from with you, and it was like, what am I doing showing my kids this for the sake of what? For the sake of non-conflict, for the sake of the hardness that no doubt occurred over the next 3 or 4 years as you recalibrated the way your family was going to show up and how you were going to show up and all of that, which I'm still going through. But the reality of it is you can sit in that for years, and you can sit in that decision of not speaking up, of not speaking your truth, or you can take that hard path, which is hard. It's hard, but that's where I come back to, like, you know, I don't know. I'm not a therapist, so I don't know the statistics on this, but I've been in enough men's groups now or struggling people working through divorce or separation to know that they really fall into two camps. Like, most people know pretty quickly if divorce is really what they need. They just are not choosing to step to it. And there's a few that really are still working through it. And so I think learning to be open and honest with ourselves is like that number one, like, and just looking at that path and being willing to step forward is important.
Yeah, and it's okay to not know too, right?
Oh, totally.
And there's guys in the middle. It's like, I think I know that, I don't know, and then this, and it's okay to not know, you know, and just own that, and just. But again, this is coming from someone that for most of his life kept quiet, didn't fully speak.
Yeah,
you know. My authentic truth, like I was genuine in my desires of what I wanted, but like also wasn't truly speaking it out of fear and out of all the different things. But when you actually can speak it, mm-hmm. I mean, this is the saying, the truth sets you free. I mean, the truth hurts.
Yeah.
And it can hurt other people. It can hurt ourselves, but it sets you free. And to me, that freedom is priceless. There's so much peace that's found that, even though it could be initial, reactions or chaos associated with that. But once you actually speak it, and it's like there's freedom that you can't, it's hard to put into words. But to me, the freedom and the peace and speaking truth to me is more valuable than anything else for me today.
Yeah. Well, and what resonates with that is what you said before, is like, it's okay to not know. Like, the interesting thing for me was, as I said, as I really went through the divorce, when I looked at, like, why did I do this? Right. And it was because it was like, hey, I have to be more authentic. Then it was like, okay, well, what is me authentically? And there's a huge part of me that didn't know. Right. And I think to get to a place to where you can really be free, you have to know who you are and what you want, how you're going to show up. And I had spent a lot of years of my life sacrificing, once again, what I really felt in order to appease or be liked,
and you probably at the time didn't even realize you were sacrificing.
Absolutely not. No, I was completely unconscious to it in a lot of ways and thought I was acting out of the way that I felt. But really what I was doing is I was sacrificing or acquiescing my own desire to figure out what it is I wanted, and then show up in the relationship with, this is how I'm going to show up. Instead, it was like, okay, this is how they want me to show up, so I'll show up that way, right? But then now all of a sudden put me in this recovering people pleaser mode, and it's like, okay, well, how am I going to show up? And that gets scary when it's like, I don't know. I don't know what I want. Like, how am I going to show up? Like, what does that even look like? Because I'm so used to, like, reading and feeling or asking questions and figuring out how someone else wants me to show up. And then I'm like, okay, I'll show up that way. Right. And so coming back to this freedom is this last year, especially as I've transitioned out of Rustico now 2 years and 2.5 years in, it's like I've had to spend a lot of time really getting clear with like, what is it I want and how do I want to show up? And I'm messy, you know, and I was just talking to you about this with my kids, like the first 6-8 months as I went through this divorce process, I totally showed up horribly with my family, with my kids. And that a lot of that is because I didn't know how I wanted to show up. And that's messy. But that's also part of, I think, life. Like, I think as we evolve, like we constantly need to learn. It's not even just knowing what we want all the time, because I think that shifts. I think it's getting clear on like how to understand what it is we feel, and then learning how to voice that in a way. And it's in all sorts of things. Like anger for me is one thing that's actually really interesting. I've never been an angry person. I'm really not. Like, you know, I can get heated in an argument for sure, and you know, but like anger isn't like, I'm not just an angry person. But I'm realizing like it's because I've totally have avoided feelings of anger. When I'm angry, it's like something I think, especially in my youth growing up, it was like that was really frowned upon. So I shove it down and I switch it out or I change it out. And now I'm like actually learning to sit with anger. Like, okay, I'm upset about this, right? Not expressing it in an angry way, but learning how to express and feel what's behind that anger. And
yeah, because anger is just, you know, more often than not, it's a secondary emotion. There's something below it.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
whatever
usually,
happens to be.
Usually hurt or fear, right? And those are the two that. But for me, it was like I was not acknowledging the anger at all, and alchemizing it usually to, or transitioning it, really not alchemizing, I should say, just stuffing it away into something else. And now I'm just recognizing I'm recognizing in me where it's like, hey, I still actually feel very hurt over this thing that occurred. In fact, me and my older brother had a conversation about an incident that occurred back when we were in high school, you know, together, and just realizing like, I still feel hurt over this. And there was a little bit of this anger coming up. There's always been this little bit of resentment. He, you know, and I voiced it to him, and he voiced something back to me where he's like, yeah, I've always felt this way and just struggled with this. But our relationship and the way we were taught growing up was like, no, you don't talk about that stuff. You just leave it alone. And the release that occurred, you know, after 25, 30 years of us both being able to just be like, whoa, like I didn't even see your side of that. I didn't even know that was happening, and how you felt. And just realizing, man, I wish I would have just been able to, one, recognize how I felt, to voice how I felt in a much more emotionally mature way.
So much of it goes back to how we were raised with those things. You know, you know, I was, my dad grew up in a household where both his parents were alcoholics, fought all the time, and he was the go-between. Like, so they'd come to him and he'd have to be the mediator. And so he was raised in this environment. So my dad would get so, even not so much now, I haven't been in a situation with him recently, like where he gets triggered, but if there's conflict, it's like, there's not space, or that when growing up, there was not space to be able to express anger or frustration. So if my brothers and I'm the oldest of four, if we got into a fight or an argument, it was like, it's done, period. There was no, the minute he said it was over, it was over.
Yeah.
But yet there were unresolved feelings. We weren't able to work through things. And so I was raised in that environment that it wasn't, you couldn't, and you couldn't share, you couldn't, I mean, you could be angry, but if it was there, it's done. Like, you just have to bury it. And I buried so much of not using my voice. And I remember as we were getting older, there was a moment with one of my brothers. We were up in Park City, you know, Main Street. We're actually in the Main Street Pizza Noodle place, you know, that's up there in Park City, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother and I start going at it. Like, I'm pissed, he's pissed, and we're like almost raising voices. My dad's sitting at the table, he's losing his mind. He's all, stop fighting. I literally looked at him, I said, get out of here, we'll work this out. So my dad gets up, walks outside, he's pacing back and forth I can see him, just the anxiety that's going through him. My brother and I are going at it. You know, I don't know how long it lasted, but he and I, we said our piece, we gave each other a hug, and it was over. But my dad was a complete shit show because his two sons were fighting. And there were other moments where things like that happened. And again, it used to really bother me.
Yeah.
But then as we got older, and it's like, no, this needs to be spoken. You need to be able to work through this stuff. And then also having compassion and empathy towards him because of it's literally trauma triggering to him because of his upbringing. Right. And not that he purposely did that, but he created an environment where we couldn't share our feelings. There was never resolve with anything. And so for me to actually use my voice and learn how to do that in relations, I struggled with that. I struggled with it in life. And literally, I can say here, I'm 47 at the time of this recording, almost 48. And it's like, I'm finally feel like I can use my voice, after all these years.
Right. Yeah.
And the catalyst to actually being able to use the voice, this is the beauty of loss, is it takes these, a divorce, losing a business, breakups, heartache, whatever it happens to be. It's like, you through the pain of, or the destruction or the letting go of that, it's all of a sudden it's like, well, who am I? What do I want to do? And not using my voice doesn't work. And I've learned so many lessons that I need to use my voice, even if it means I'm going to offend somebody, even if it means someone's not going to like me. I have to use my voice to be authentically. So I'm just not in self-betrayal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you kind of wake up to that, right? The unconsciousness becomes conscious, and then you can change that, right? I don't know who said that. I think that's Adler, but I love what you say there, because similar upbringing. And I was actually sitting down to lunch a few weeks ago with my dad, and we have 10 kids. There's yours, mine, and ours. It's a whole nightmare. And my parents were similar, like avoidant. In fact, I remember early on in my childhood, I remember this very distinct memory where it was like when I would walk through the front door, my very first thing was to feel out, like, how is my stepmom going to show up, and what emotional needs do I need to take care of her, because she was emotionally fairly distant. And I remember talking to my dad about this just a few weeks ago, where I was like, yeah, Dad, the way we were raised just taught us to avoid conflict, avoid talking to each other. And he looked at me and he was like, yeah, I know we sucked as parents, but it's not our entire fault that you guys had all these choices through the rest of your life. And I kind of laughed at that, because I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I totally would have been blaming my parents. Like, this is my upbringing, right? You raised me this way, and this is how I am, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's true, right? But the reality of it is like becoming aware of that upbringing and becoming aware of like how I avoid using my voice, avoid conflict, was my work to work on. And my parents were actually, that's the catalyst that really was, that's just them being parents. And the issues that I know that I've given my kids, right, for them to work on, are going to be their work that they have to do. And I think, so I guess where I'm going at it with this is like, I think I absolutely love and adore my parents and respect them. And not only have I forgiven them for that, but I'm actually like on this other side of that coin, which is like I'm asking for their forgiveness for me thinking that they had to be better than that, when in reality they're just human too.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it was years ago I was with a coach, and I carried a lot of resentment towards my parents, specifically my dad. I'd bring up moments and things, and and I'd bring stuff up. And I remember one of my brothers years ago, he's like, dude, you still carry a lot of resentment. And I'm talking about stuff that happened in high school and like different stuff. And this is like 20, 30 years later, right? And I'm like, and I wasn't conscious of it at the time. And so as I'm working through these things and on my own self-discovery path, I was talking with a coach at the time, and I just broke down. Like, I don't even remember what he said. And I looked at him like, I'm being a martyr. Like, my dad did the best that he possibly could, given the tools that he had, given his upbringing, and I always felt like I couldn't do enough. He was always angry. He was always upset. And, and there were seasons of my life where my dad struggled financially, and the pressure of being a husband, a father, a provider, and all of that. He didn't know what to do with it, given his tools and resources based off his upbringing. So then it just got projected and vomited all over me, and I didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
So then I took it personal. And it was interesting. So, on my own, I read a book. I got to remember the name of this, because I always quote it, but there was a book that I was reading where this dad's under the sink, and he's fixing the sink, and his little, 3 or 4 year old son comes up to, hey, Dad, can you come play? And he's like, no, I'm fixing the sink. And of course the son keeps asking and asking and asking. And finally he just loses his mind, yells at his son. Son runs away crying. And then he has this aha, and he goes, I'm so frustrated at this damn sink, and I just took it out on my son. And then I realized the parallels with this is like, wait a minute, the stuff that my dad did to me, not consciously, not purposely, I'm doing the same thing to my kids. my marriage is falling apart. I'm morbidly overweight. I have all these like unhealthy, lack of self-love, all these feelings. And I'm just taking out my stuff and projecting and vomiting all over my kids. And I wouldn't have maybe been aware with it had I not experienced it myself, you know, and we all have these things with, as it relates to our kids. You know, I talk a lot about this podcast, like, you know, a lot of the healing and compassion and empathy now is, you know, true forgiveness. Like I don't hold anything. I mean, I love my parents. Like I don't hold anything against them anymore, you know, but a big part of that, a catalyst for that was using plant medicine, specifically ayahuasca.
Yeah. See, and if I can interject there, like that forgiveness component for me was critical for me learning that it wasn't me forgiving my dad. It was actually me learning how to accept him as a human.
Agreed.
In order for me to actually learn how to accept myself as human and have my own flaws and understand that I'm going to fuck it up, which I have in some ways.
Oh, we all have.
Yeah. Yeah. But there was this, as long as there was in me this mentality of like, my parents should have raised me better. It's this underlying, I should have done better. Right. So as soon as it was the weird dynamic for me when I could realize like, holy cow, like I am holding my dad to this unrealistic standard. And at the same time, I am not forgiving myself for the same exact kind of scenario.
Yeah. The same thing, you know, and we've all, I've joked with my kids, and just because of my own awareness and thing, you know, I started to talk about ayahuasca when my oldest son went in to do it for the first time. I was just like hyper, like overly communicating it again. Until you've done it, you don't know until you do it. But, you know, I told him like, hey, there's a good chance you're going to have a lot of stuff or have some stuff that comes up with how I've parented you. I've made plenty of mistakes. I'm like, I just want you to know that I want to be here to hold space for you, to be able to talk through that. I'm not perfect. I've made plenty of mistakes. And it was a beautiful thing. So when he first sat, he's like, so some stuff came up. I'm like, let's talk about it. And so it was a beautiful space to be able to hold space for him to be able to share things that I did or didn't do and how I showed up. And more than anything, I gave him space, and it created safety for him to share that it was okay, you know? And it was a very, very healing process, almost like this generational thing, you know, that I experienced with my dad. And my dad and I, even in the last year or two, have had heartfelt conversations about what I felt and what he's felt, you know, and all the things as we worked together. I mean, there was just layers and layers. And, you know, there was a moment we were at a restaurant here locally, and we're both just bawling our eyes out, just sharing everything. This was last year sometime. And I remember this woman came up to us and she looked at my dad and she goes, that man loves you so much. Like this has been, and she goes, I don't even know what's going on here, but I can just see the love. And, you know, and both of us are just crying, but it was so freeing and healing just to be able to speak to it and give my dad space for him to be seen and for me to be seen. And just like, none of us did anything on purpose, because at the end of the day, we both love each other deeply, and nothing intentional was ever done intentionally to hurt or to cause harm or to create feelings around stuff. We're all just trying to figure this out.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. And I think for me, this, you know, as this journey for me it's just been a transition, 22-year journey, I would say. And now I've kind of shifted into this new phase. And that has been one of the biggest things for me to start with is, what do I really want? And am I okay with who I am in this process? Right. I think that's one of the dynamics that has been hard for me this last little bit is those feelings of failure. Like, hey, 22-year business, and I couldn't hold it together. Right. Which is funny that we look at it that way when I'm like, hey, I ran a business for 22 years.
Which
like,
you've already, I mean, what, 90% of all businesses fail within the first year or something? I mean, right. I can't remember, whatever. It's most don't make it.
Right. But obviously we tie ourselves a ton to the things that we don't do, or the things that we hold ourselves accountable for, instead of giving ourselves that grace of allowing the mistakes, if you will, which in hindsight, in a lot of ways, are not really mistakes. They're necessary learning. They're learning
stepping
lessons.
stones.
Yeah, and allowing ourselves to just learn those lessons with a little bit of, grace in there. But I'd say humor more than anything. I'm learning how to have a little bit more like just look at things and kind of just be like, yeah, that is definitely fucked up, or that was wrong. Hey, I'm sorry, right? And I'm still figuring out why I did what I did, but I did it because of a reason. And I'm going to figure out what that is. And I think this relates to like what you're talking about, that burn up phase is like, I feel a little bit like kind of the Phoenix, kind of what you got going on here. It's like, you know, I melted a lot of things down, if you will, right? But in order to like grow new, grow more, grow better.
It's the beauty of loss, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, you said something that I think is really important. I think we forget this because we go on, life's on autopilot, and we're, you know, as men, family, kids, work, we're just doing the thing, pushing towards a particular goal, whatever. And I think we don't necessarily realize it, that we're choosing it all. Like everything's a choice, you know, and it's like, and yet unconsciously our identity just becomes all these things. And then all of a sudden something drastic or traumatic happens or is taken away or whatever it happens to be. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what I thought isn't necessarily what's been presented with who I thought I was or what was going to happen didn't happen. Now what? Who am I? Yeah. You know? And I remember when I went on social media, you know, just over a couple of years ago and actually shared what I had gone through and talked about being suicidal and talked about all the pain and everything I went through it. I had a gentleman call me that tried to buy his business like 10 years before. So he calls and he's like, hey, he's like, I saw your post. I'm like, yeah, you know? And so then because I was so open and vulnerable, he shared his experience of him losing his identity and all the things. And he said something I'll never forget. He goes, how cool is it at 45 you get a do-over? Who gets a do-over at 45?
Yeah.
Perspective, right?
Right.
Well, was I in that same headspace? Hell no.
Yeah.
I just lost millions of dollars. Just the pain and all of it. And it's like, I wasn't feeling that way. I was more poor me.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Comparison mode. But I can look at myself today, having worked through all that. It's like, hey, I get a do-over.
Yeah.
Like, and what do I want it to be?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm the author of my life. I'm the creator of my life. What do I want?
Yeah.
Who do I want to be? What do I want? And it's like, and again, that's part of what we kind of talked about. The more we can step into our authenticity, right? The more, and I believe the core of it's really is just self-confidence. It's when we become more and more confident with who we are, accepting all the parts of us, the shadow side, the, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we all have it. When we can accept who we are and really decide, like, what do we want? I truly believe we can do anything or have anything, no matter what's happened. Yeah. You know, and that's what I teach here with this is it's like, if you want to go after it, but like, we're always choosing. Everything's a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I actually, the other day was actually talking to my oldest son a little bit about that, where it was like, hey, not choosing is a choice.
100%.
Right. And for him right now, it's like, he's just not making choices. And it's like, hey, you realize that like by not choosing to get a job or go to school or make this decision, like you are choosing a choice. So that's important to realize too. And I think we do that unconsciously. Like for me, in a lot of ways, it was me not willing to vocalize how I felt, thinking I didn't need to do that was the non-choice, that I was still making a choice. And eventually it leads me onto a path to where I suddenly am like, hey, I can't do this. Right. And now, that had to shift and change. For me right now, the other thing that I think is interesting is like also recognizing where you're at is an important part of the more that you know what it is you want and who you are inside that authenticity component, the more that you can sit in that space of where you're currently at, right? Take this guy that gave you such unique perspective at the time that you were sitting in a space where it was hard to see that perspective, right? And I would say, like, still honoring the fact that you needed to go through the grief. You needed to feel that loss.
Oh, yeah,
like,
it's part of the process.
Like, yeah, it's part of that process. Like, and for me, it's easy to be like, hey, you get a do-over, start over. Well, some days it doesn't feel like that, right? And allowing myself to recognize, like, hey, this feels hard right now.
Yeah,
and I know it's
sucks.
a do-over. Yeah. And I know it's a do-over. And I know, like, I've got potential and I've got, you know, but also at the same time, like, it's tough.
Yeah,
and this is the space that I'm at, and I'm okay with that right now. Is been hard for me to get to.
And someone quoted this, or I read it, or I'd love to say that I came up with this, but I know I didn't. You know, our perception is our reality, how we see things, right? And again, in the season that I'm in today, I'm actually trying to, like, my perception is my reality, but I want to be open to a different perspective. Right. So when that guy shared, you know, when that gentleman shared that, he's like, that my perception was different than his, but he had a different perspective that I can see today. I didn't clearly see it at that moment. you know? And one thing I wanted to circle back on what you said too is, you know, we're always choosing. Everything's a choice. There are things that come to us that we frankly don't choose. Mm-hmm. You know, literally yesterday, a woman broke into my car. I don't know if you saw my post on social.
Yeah,
literally,
I saw that.
Yeah, she broke into my car, stole my AirPods, had this whole thing, chased her down. I was ready. I didn't know who it was, obviously, because I could track it, you know, with Find My iPhone or whatever. And then when I finally saw who was there, it was a person wrapped up in a blanket. Then it was this woman, and she's drugged out of her mind. And all of a sudden, my anger just completely shifted to compassion. And I'm just this poor woman, how much pain she's carrying. You know, so I was able to shift. Now, I didn't choose her. I mean, yes, I left my car unlocked, so ultimately I'm accountable for that part of it, but I didn't choose like that.
Yeah.
But what was presented, I have a choice of how I show up.
Right.
You know, we have kids that are byproducts of divorce. Our children didn't choose, hey, I want mom and dad, you know, to get divorced. They didn't choose that, but yet even our kids are responsible, like with what you do with it. Right. As they get older, you know, and everything's a choice. Whether we don't necessarily always choose everything that happens to us, but we are 100% responsible for what we do with what life presents us, whether it's something that we've done or something that somebody has done to us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, and to me, that's very empowering when you can take 100% responsibility for the role that we play, because I'm the common denominator in all my life, in my life. And even on this post that I did yesterday, there were a few comments that people are like, you're not responsible for someone stealing your car. I mean, stealing stuff out of your car. You're not responsible for that. Of course I'm not. But if I being completely accountable for the role that I played, I left my car unlocked. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's literally happened 3 times. You'd think I'd know by now, right? Trust me, I'm not going to lock my car.
There's something that you're
so of course I'm accountable for it. But it was so funny. But like, people didn't want to don't you take that on. That's not on you. And it's like, yes, but I still played a role. Yeah.
Well, and that's that, you know, we talked earlier a little bit about the difference between accountability and authenticity, right? But they are intertwined, like radical honesty is radical authenticity is holding yourself accountable and seeing where you either make decisions or react, right? Or don't make decisions to things that then cause consequences that you were accountable for, right? And owning those pieces is also part of that authenticity piece. That's accountability of like, this is how I am showing up. This is how I want to show up differently. And now stepping forward with that, either voicing what it is that needs to be voiced or doing the action that needs to take place. Like,
do you think it's possible to be too honest, too truthful? I'll give you an example while you're thinking about that.
Yeah, interesting on that.
So let's say like your girlfriend, wife, whatever, right? It puts on an outfit. She's like, what do you think? And you think it's the most unflattering thing she's ever put on, right? Would you just say like, babe, that's the most unflattering dress you've ever put on? Or like, oh, it's not my favorite. Or, hey, maybe we should consider something else. Like, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I've sat with this. Like, can you actually be, you know, because I'm in a season where I want to be integrous. I want to be truthful. I don't want to hurt anybody. So I think delivery matters. And how you communicate it. But I also feel like if she's truly asking, you know, if I'm, you know, is that quote unquote wrong, even if it hurts her feelings that she loves it and I don't.
Yeah. You know, I think on that one, it's interesting that in yoga, there is the yamas and niyamas, which are kind of the 10 commandments in yoga. I did very loosely done, but they're kind of 5 do's and 5 don'ts, right? And the very first one, which is kind of the governing one over all of the other 9, is do no harm. And by that, I think is how you play that out, right? Is like, how can you be truthful without
causing
harming, you know, your wife's ego or her feelings or yourself in the process? How can you do no harm, right? And that's that delivery, that tactfulness that probably has to occur. So when it comes to truthfulness, it's like I am always working on how can I be more truthful, and I feel like in a lot of ways I am. But there are some things where it's like I betray myself by not being true to what I might need to say. So how can I do that? Like, do no harm in the way I take action or speak.
I love that, and I think sometimes too I don't want to get off on too many tangents, but I've really connected with the philosophy of Kabbalah. Have you studied Kabbalah at all?
A little bit. Not. It's actually something that's pretty interesting to me right now.
It's a philosophy. It's non-religious. It is a belief system, if you will, that really resonates with how I see the world. Just very, and I don't by no means connect with all of it, but one of the things that they talk about is it's a phrase that's called the bread of shame. So you can actually overshare. So if somebody doesn't have the capacity to actually receive what you need to say, it's actually not even about the person. It's about you. It's your ego that's attached to it.
Right. Huh.
So it's an interesting dance. So like there's been people in my life very close to me or in relationships where I'm not necessarily fully saying everything, but I also know the person's not in a space or has the capacity to even receive it. So by me speaking my truth, if they don't have the capacity to fully receive and process it, it's actually not about them. It's about my ego and wanting to express it. And so it's knowing when to, obviously it's the more intuitive and the more, again, I think we get in alignment. It's finding the balance between when do I say something, and sometimes not saying anything is actually the answer, even if you're not fully telling everything, because sometimes people don't have the capacity to hear it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And for sure, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would come back to, it feels like to me, like if it relates to me being truthful with myself, then it probably needs to be shared.
Yeah.
Right. If it's just something that maybe I see in someone else, but they're not seeing in themselves, when and how and where I choose to deliver that is totally based off of, you're right, it could be ego. Or, is there really an intent to help that person see something, or is it more just me satisfying my needs and wants, right? And so
tell our listeners and those that are watching on YouTube about this new business you're building.
Yeah. So new business entity, or I won't call it an entity, it's a brand, I guess. It's called Ember and Ether Shop. And what we're creating is really products that help you attune to your highest frequency, if you will. Rustico was a leather goods company. We largely were known for our journals and notebooks, and that's because I have a huge passion for journaling and what it can actually do for you. Like, I think a journaling practice for everyone is a brilliant way to like level up your energy. We talked once, I think, a lot about gratitude and the potency of that emotion, right? That creates this higher vibrational energy. Well, gratitude journal is like massively important. The product that I'm building right now that I'm kind of really excited about is these meditation bead necklaces, or mala necklaces is what they're known as, and they're 108 beads. I've used mala necklaces throughout years for meditation, and I've always been passionate about stones and the energy that they provide, different energy, and stones can help calibrate our own energy, which is very susceptible to our emotions. So you use stones, I think, and other energetic artifacts, if you will, to help you calibrate your own energy. Well, we created this system where we can take some key data from you and build a specific, we call them soul maps of your unique energetic blueprint that's then put into a mala bead necklace or meditation necklace that then will help, as you wear it, it'll help you attune to your highest frequency. So we're doing bracelets as well as necklaces. And so Ember and Ether Shop is the brand.
Is the website up now?
It's going to be up here in a little bit. It's really been by word of mouth. I've been doing these now. I've worn mala necklaces. People have seen me wear them forever. In fact, I'm wearing mine right now, right? I never actually probably hardly take it off, but
Ember and Earth Shop.
Ember and Ether.
Okay.
Ether Shop.
We'll put the link in the show notes. If it's not up yet, no, it's coming. By the time we post this.
Yeah, and so right now it's kind of been word of mouth. We've just been building these, and so we're almost done with the website, and that'll go live here in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome.
But we're pretty dang excited about it, and it's and that'll be all products that really help you attune to your highest frequency. Is where I'm really passionate, and so
I love it. Yeah. Brother, I'm like, you and I could talk for hours, and I've one of my favorite things about you is just how open you are, and again, a theme we've talked a lot is authentic, right? Mm-hmm. And knowing what it feels like intimately with myself, and right, moving through these identity shifts and going through very difficult and challenging times in business and relationships, in that process of losing ourselves, we find ourselves, and I've loved our conversations over the years, and I look up to you and just love the way you see things. And it's been an honor to have you here on my podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we do it again.
Yeah, we will for sure. Thank you, my friend. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.